I bought the house because it was cheap, and I needed to disappear for a while. Not from anything criminal, just a life that had gotten too loud. Too many people with opinions about how I should be handling things. The listing said 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 5 acres, partially wooded, rural setting, priced to sell. The last part should have been a red flag, but when you're running from noise, quiet is all you're shopping for. The property sat at the edge of a gravel road outside of Barton, Arkansas, deep Ozark country. The kind of place where the hills fold into each other and the trees grow so thick the sunlight has to fight its way to the ground. My nearest neighbor was close enough to wave at from the mailbox, but far enough that nobody showed up unannounced, which was the whole point. The Larsons, a couple in their 40s with 2 kids, a boy around 11 named Caleb, and a girl, Emma, who couldn't have been older than 8. Greg, the dad, helped me get my propane hooked up the first week. Had a firm handshake, and the kind of easy small talk that doesn't require you to share anything real. Stacy, the mom, brought over a casserole and a foil pan and told me to keep the dish. The kids played at the tree line most afternoons, chasing each other through the underbrush and screaming the way kids do when they've got too much energy and no screen to absorb it. I liked it out there. The porch faced west, and every evening, the sky would turn copper and pink behind the ridge. I'd sit out there with a beer and listen to absolutely nothing. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through drywall. Just insects and wind, and sometimes the far-off sounds of kids laughing in the woods. For about 3 weeks, it was exactly what I needed. The kids found the cave on a Saturday. I know because Greg mentioned it at the mailboxes that afternoon. Said Caleb had been poking around a dry creek bed near the property line and found a sinkhole. Not huge, maybe 4 feet across, but it opened into something deeper. Took a flashlight down there and everything, Greg said. He was smiling the way parents do when their kid does something mildly dangerous and survives. Says it goes back pretty far. Probably an old solution cave. Limestone around here is full of them. I nodded and said something about exploring storm drains as a kid. We laughed. That was that. But that evening, I noticed something. Emma was standing at the tree line, facing my house, just standing there with her hands at her sides. I was on the porch with my beer, and I raised my hand to wave. She waved back, but it was wrong. The timing was off, like the signal had to travel a long distance before it reached her arm. I raised my hand, and for a full 2 seconds, she just stared at me. Then her hand came up, slow and mechanical, and mirrored the gesture exactly. Same angle, same height, same number of fingers extended. She's just a weird kid. Kids are weird. I mentioned it to Stacy the next morning, kept it light. Told her Emma had been standing at the tree line the night before. She laughed. Oh, they must be obsessed with that cave. Caleb says it echoes. They've been going down there every day after school. At night, too? She gave me a look, not quite annoyed, more like she was deciding whether I was the kind of neighbor who was going to be a problem. She was probably just playing, Stacy said. I dropped it. 4 days later, I saw both of them. It was past 10 at night. I'd been reading in the living room with the curtains open because there's nothing out there to hide from. Or there wasn't. I looked up from my book, and there they were. Both kids, standing at the tree line, maybe 40 yards from the house, side by side. Their heads were tilted at the same angle. Not slightly, significantly. Like someone had taken their skulls and cocked them 15 degrees to the left. Identical, synchronized. I grabbed the flashlight by the door and stepped onto the porch, Caleb? Emma? Nothing. I turned on the flashlight and hit the girl's face first. Her expression was blank. Not sleepy, not confused. Blank. Mouth slightly open, eyes catching the light the way an animal's does on the dark highway. Then they turned, both of them, at the same exact time. Same speed, same pivot on the same foot. And they walked into the woods in perfect unison. Same stride length, same arm swing, like two marionettes on the same set of strings. I stood on that porch for a long time, long enough for the flashlight battery to start dimming. The next morning, I went over to the Larsons. Greg answered the door in a t-shirt and jeans, coffee in hand. I told him what I saw. He frowned. Both kids were in bed by 8:30. I checked on them before I turned in. Greg, I saw them, both of them, standing in the field at 10 o'clock at night. I don't know what to tell you. His voice was flat, not defensive, just flat, like he was reading a line off a cue card. They were in bed. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I saw a deer in the dark, and my brain filled in the rest. I didn't imagine it. I tried to let it go. Spent the next 2 days doing yard work, tightening fence posts, reorganizing the garage. Normal things. Things with weight and texture that keep your hands busy and your brain quiet. I drove into town for groceries and sat at the parking lot for an extra 20 minutes just to be around other people. But every evening, I ended up on the porch. And every evening, my eyes went straight to the tree line. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, a chalky mineral scent carried on the breeze, like wet limestone and old pennies. It came and went with the wind, strongest in the evenings when the air got still and the temperature dropped. I told myself it was the creek bed, natural runoff from the rock. The Ozarks smell like the inside of the earth sometimes. Sulfur, iron, calcium. That's all it was. Just the ground breathing. Except the ground doesn't breathe. I found the sinkhole on a Wednesday afternoon. I told myself I was just walking the property line, checking fence posts, but I knew where I was going. And I think part of me had known since the first night I saw Emma standing in the dark. The opening was right where Greg described it. A dark mouth in the earth, maybe 4 feet across, ringed with crumbling limestone and exposed roots. The smell was thick here, chalk and copper, concentrated. It settled in the back of my throat like a film. I climbed down. The cave opened up about 10 feet below the surface. The walls were damp and scored with grooves, long, parallel scratches in the limestone, spaced about 3 inches apart. They ran in clean lines for several feet at a stretch, then stopped and started again at a different height. Like something had dragged its fingers along the rock while moving through the passage. I told myself it was natural, erosion, water channels. But the grooves were too even, too deliberate, and they only ran in one direction. Deeper. Farther in, I found the skin. Translucent, papery, clinging to the rock in patches like shed snakeskin. But the pieces were too large. Some of them were the size of a bedsheet. I touched one and it crumbled between my fingers, dry and weightless. Underneath it, the rock was discolored, stained a faint yellowish white. The ceiling got lower. I had to crouch, then crawl. My flashlight beam shook, and I could hear my own breathing bouncing off the walls. The passage narrowed, then opened into a wider chamber. The ceiling rose to maybe 12 feet. It was covered in handprints, pressed into the stone like fossils, dozens of them, but the fingers were too long. Each print had 4 fingers and a thumb, and each finger was the length of my forearm. They overlapped in clusters, layered on top of each other, pressed into the limestone over what must have been years, decades, maybe longer. I heard breathing, not from deeper in the cave, from above me. I looked up. It was folded against the ceiling like a closed umbrella, pale. So pale it was almost translucent, like the shed skin on the walls. I could see the lattice of its ribs through its chest. Its limbs were impossibly long, bent at too many joints. Pressed flat against the rock, its spine was a ridge of white knobs pushing through the skin. Its head was smooth and featureless, except for a mouth that hung open just slightly, like a door left ajar. It wasn't moving, but its head was turned toward me. I don't remember climbing out. I remember dirt under my fingernails and the taste of copper in my mouth and my own jagged breathing. Then, I was on the grass, on my hands and knees, and the sun was still up, and the sky was blue, and nothing about the world above had changed. But I had. That night, I locked every door and window in the house, closed every curtain, sat in the kitchen with the lights off and a knife on the table, because I didn't own a gun, and I hadn't thought I'd need one out here. Around midnight, I heard it, scratching at the front door, slow and methodical, not frantic, patient, like something testing the grain of the wood. I crept to the window beside the door and pulled the curtain back 1 inch. Something was crouched on the porch. It was on all fours, but not the way an animal moves. The proportions were wrong, arms too long, elbows bending outward at angles that made my stomach turn. Its spine pushed up through the skin in a ridge of pale knobs. Its head was low, pressed against the gap under the front door. It was sniffing, long deliberate inhales, tasting the air that leaked through the crack. I could hear the wet sound of its nostrils working. I let the curtain fall, killed the flashlight, pressed myself against the wall, and held my breath until my lungs burned. It moved to the window. I could hear its hands on the siding, a dry, papery sound, then a soft, wet press as its palm flattened against the glass. Through the curtain, I could see the outline of its fingers. They wrapped almost all the way across the pane. It stayed there for a long time. Minutes. I counted my heartbeats because counting was the only thing keeping me from screaming. Then, it left. I heard it drop off the porch and move across the yard. Not running, walking. Like it had all the time in the world. In the morning, the kids were playing in the yard like nothing had happened, laughing, chasing each other. Emma saw me standing on the porch and looked up. She smiled. The smile was too wide. I could see her gums above her top teeth. I went to the Larsons' house that afternoon. Greg opened the door. I didn't bother with small talk. Something's living in that cave. It came to my house last night. Your kids are acting wrong, and I think you know it. Greg stared at me. Then he stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, careful. They go out at night sometimes. We stopped trying to keep them inside. What? They go out, they come back, and they're fine in the morning. He said it the way you'd describe a dog that likes to roam. It's easier not to fight it. Greg, something's out there. I was inside the cave. I saw it. He looked past me, not at the tree line, at something farther away, something I couldn't see. We've been here 6 years. The cave's been here longer. You just have to let them go when they need to go. Behind him, through the screen door, Stacy was standing in the hallway. She was watching us. Her head was tilted, same angle as the kids. The exact same angle, 15 degrees to the left. How long has she been like that? Weeks? Months? Since before I moved in? I backed off the porch without another word. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen one last time. I wasn't waiting. I was confirming. The sound came first. A low, resonant exhalation from the direction of the sinkhole, like the earth clearing its throat, then movement at the tree line. Shapes, pale, elongated, moving between the trunks in a slow, fluid procession. 3 of them, maybe 4. They didn't walk the way people do. They pulled themselves forward on their arms and swung their lower bodies behind them, like something that had studied bipedal movement from a distance and decided it wasn't worth the effort. The kids were with them. Caleb and Emma walked alongside the pale things like it was the most natural thing in the world, like they were walking to the school bus. Emma was holding one of them by the hand, its fingers wrapped around her entire wrist twice over. They disappeared into the woods, toward the sinkhole, toward the dark mouth in the ground. I didn't sleep. I packed. I left before sunrise, threw everything I cared about into the truck, and drove east until the hills flattened out and the trees thinned and the sky got wide enough to breathe in. I'm somewhere else now, renting a place in a town with streetlights and neighbors on both sides, and a gas station 2 blocks away that stays open until 11. The kind of place where you can hear other people living their lives through the walls. For once, that noise is a comfort. I filed the paperwork to sell the house. The listing went up last week. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 5 acres, partially wooded. Priced to sell. I didn't mention the cave. I should be fine. I know that. I'm 200 miles from that sinkhole. Whatever lives in it doesn't know where I am. It doesn't follow people. It stays in its cave, and it comes out at night, and it does whatever the hell it does with the Larsons' kids, and then it goes back underground. That's what I keep telling myself. But I can't stop checking the tree line at dusk. There's no tree line here. It's a parking lot, a strip mall, a road with cars on it. But every evening around sunset, something in me tenses up, and I stand at the window and scan the distance, looking for shapes, looking for that pale, wrong movement between the shadows. Last Tuesday, I noticed a scratch on my front door. Long, thin, parallel marks in the paint. I don't remember them being there when I moved in. The landlord said it was probably the previous tenant's cat. Probably. This morning I woke up early. Couldn't sleep. I walked to the kitchen to make coffee. And I stopped in the hallway. The smell. Faint. Almost nothing. Chalk and copper. I think it learned my scent before I got out. And I think it remembers.